Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
As summer vacation ends, parents rush to prepare for another school year. You may have filled your child's backpack but missed the most important detail in your preparations. Joining me today is Jeanne Dexter and Paul Schweinler, co-founders of the Talking Jar series, to discuss how parents, teachers, and other adults can start conversations with their child that allow them to talk about what concerns them, express what they need, and build strength and confidence to face a new school year. Hello, I'm Stephen Kotad, your guest host, and joining me today for our program entitled Back to School Planning, How to Equip Your Child with the Strength and Confidence to Face the School Year from Day One, is Jeanne Dexter and Paul Schweinler. Jeanne A. Dexter is the founder and co-creator of the Talking Jar series and the proud mother of two incredible grown children. Jeanne is a public speaker and trainer, educating parents and children on effective communication and connecting. Jeanne, along with her partner, Paul J. Schweinler, creates workshops and seminars for children and parents on how to talk to each other in a non-intimidating and fun way about difficult issues. Jeanne's passion is to change the world by creating harmony and balance within the family, the neighborhood, and entire communities by effectively communicating. Paul J. Schweinler is a licensed mental health counselor and nationally certified counselor, diplomat of the American Psychotherapy Association, and a board-certified expert in traumatic stress, and co-founder of the Talking Jar series. Paul is an approved instructor with the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, a Florida Supreme Court certified mediator, and Florida Supreme Court approved primary mediation instructor. It is his hope that the Talking Jar series will help bring people of all ages together and have a significant impact in mitigating and healing many of the conflicts and hurts which occur between couples, family members, victims of abuse and domestic terrorism, including bullying. Welcome to the show, Jeanne and Paul.
Good morning.
Good morning, Steve. Good to be with you.
Thank you. We're really excited to have you here on the show, and I'm really curious as to what inspired you to create the Talking Jars, and what exactly are they?
The Talking Jars, interesting you should ask that first because we hear that question all the time. The Talking Jars are a tool. Kids prefer to call them a game because they're fun to look at and they're fun to work with. They're jars that contain open-ended questions and statements about different topics. They're conversation starters, and they prompt conversation on topics such as anger, grief, bullying, back to school, about your family, about everyday talk, and any other. We actually have quite a few titles right now. We have 12 titles in the Talking Jar series.
Okay. So what was the inspiration for creating them?
The inspiration was that I, like many people out there today, was in a very difficult time in my life. I was going through a divorce. My two children were 8 and 11, and my son in particular was extremely, very angry about everything. He was angry with the family, obviously, angry with everything in life, very unhappy. And I had him in counseling in his school, actually with my partner, Paul Schweinler. And I was trying to come up with a way to get my children to continue to communicate. I had always thought I was such a great communicator as a mother. I came from great communication, and there was no communication in our family whatsoever. Everyone was just in their own little world. So I came up with an idea and took it to Paul Schweinler to create questions as so the questions weren't coming directly from mom or directly from dad or directly from a teacher, which can be very intimidating to children. So we created questions, and we decided that this was something much, much bigger than just about talking, that we could actually take topics that were difficult and make them very easy for the family. So we started writing questions, and it just took off from there. Many times as parents, we ask questions that get one-word answers from our children. How was school today? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing, yeah. So we wanted to get beyond that. We wanted to connect with our own children again. And so we realized that this was something that could be used in every family.
Mm-hmm. So how exactly do they work?
You know, they're so simple, really. We started out with having about 75 different cards folded up in a mason jar, if you can imagine that. And people would just kind of stick their hand in and pull one out at random, and would read the card. And we tried to make them thoughtful, some general. The first jar that we created was the family jar. So all kinds of topics. You know, the best meal I ever had was, what I look forward to with this vacation is, those kinds of things. And each person then answers that question and passes it around. It's that simple, but it's amazing how it opens up conversation, increases understanding, and makes connections.
Okay, so you've got different types of jars filled with open-ended questions, and they could be focused on anger or grief or bullying or back to school or family. So you open up the jar, and there's a question waiting for you. So what would be a typical question that would be inside the back to school jar?
A typical question would be, one of the things that I look the most forward to this year is, and
one of the things I'm most worried about is.
Right. Or as a parent, a question might be, or actually it's directed to the child too, but the question might be, how can I help you the most this year? What in particular could I help you with to make this year easier than last year?
What's your biggest challenge this year? What would you like to accomplish? What's going to get in the way of that? Those kinds of things.
Okay. So why would I want to try using the talking jars?
You know, so we're on the radio. We're talking, and this is more intimate, more deep conversation. It's targeted, that kind of thing. We are surrounded by all these electronics, and people do communicate, but they never get really beyond the basic chit-chat. The chit-chat is good. It helps kind of make the stage safe. The talking jars really kind of go beyond that and get you really thinking differently. The other thing that is so powerful, we're talking about talking, but one of the keys that we found about the talking jars' effectiveness is it causes other people to have to listen first to other people. And sometimes it's in that listening that you gain understanding and make connections and learn something.
Okay. So it sounds like it's a way of being more deliberate and intentional about trying to have an important conversation within your family or with the child you really care about.
You are being more deliberate. Many times they don't realize you're being deliberate, which is a good thing. And we've had parents tell us that. They don't realize the value of the communication, but it enables them to have a voice and to talk without intimidation. And the fact that everyone answers the same question, the kids really like that because they really, truly want to know what their parents think. And they're not going to ask you, the same as you may not ask them.
Well, there are things that come up, though, that with the jars that ask questions you just don't think about asking. We've heard a lot of kids be fascinated by their parents' answer to certain questions. They never heard those stories told before. And it's a wonderful way of really kind of, again, broadening and deepening those relationships.
And the stories, the family stories, I mean, we all can relate back to, at least in our generation and the generations prior to us, about the family stories that you used to hear from your grandparents, where they came from, how they got here, how they started a business when they got here. Many times those stories are not talked about anymore because we don't sit down like we used to around the table and have a conversation. So this actually prompts those type of stories as well. I would challenge most people to find out if their kids really even know where they came from, where the family originated, and how they got here.
Well, and what's also interesting is that if everyone has to answer the same question, it really, I think, would help, especially the child, understand the world of their parents a little bit better. I think parents always want to try to understand their child's world better, but if one of the concerns that a parent has is paying for the school year or getting this kid to school, the child may or may not have an understanding of that's one of the things that the parent's dealing with, and that could help them better understand why some of the other things are done in the household.
Exactly, and we find a connection and then maybe a little more sensitivity about the effort that parents kind of behind the scenes put in to make things good for the child and brings everybody together. That's great.
When I was driving here this morning, on the radio actually, there was a conversation going on about back to school. And the conversation was that it's very related to what you were just saying about how even in elementary school, children are wanting name brand items, name brand shoes, and all the very, very expensive things that have a name. And a lot of elementary parents had no idea that such things were starting at that age. So it was really interesting because that's a conversation, too, that becomes very difficult to have because you have a child who wants everything name brand, has no idea whether that's in the budget, affordable, the right thing to do, et cetera. And then you have a parent who doesn't even understand, because of where we came from, generation, doesn't even understand why would that make any difference. Why do you have to have everything that's got that's $140 or $150 pair of shoes? And the problem there is not just, it's about having the conversation, but it's also about the end result of that conversation.
Absolutely,
because
absolutely.
If you just say, sure, you can have everything that everybody else has, then the child doesn't understand the do's and don'ts of that whole conversation, why it doesn't fit into the budget. And the parent in this day and age, part of the other issue is that there's so much bullying going on that if your child isn't wearing those particular things, they many times become the target. And the parent doesn't want that either. So how do you find that middle ground?
It's reaching that level of understanding that really helps to quell or diminish arguments. So many things are based on really misunderstanding or miscommunication. I talk about this sometimes. We talk at a rate of about 150 words a minute, while the brain is able to process somewhere between 400 and 600 words a minute. Does that explain how many times you are easily misinterpreted or misunderstood? Because when you're talking, everybody else is processing at, a million miles ahead of you.
Right. So how would I introduce the talking jars to my child?
The best way to introduce it is the simplest way. Take one home and set it on the table. It's a draw. It absolutely draws them to it because they look at it. It looks like a game. They don't even seem to mind what the topics are on the front. They want to open it immediately, and they want to start pulling out questions. And that is what every parent who is using it currently has told me. That was the easiest part, was to get the kids to be drawn to it. Now, there's always a little bit of hesitation with a teen. That's a whole different issue, different time of life. However, what we've found with teenagers is if the family sits down, or even if it's two people, another sibling and a mother or a father, a single parent, or whoever's in the home, sits down and draws out a question or two and answers them and does not pressure that teen to answer, what happens every time is that they eventually want to join in because they realize it's not about intimidation. It's not about being corrected. It's about having a voice and feeling comfortable with what you're saying and having somebody listen, like Paul said.
Well, I'd like to remind our listeners that they're listening to the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk radio program with your guest host, myself, Stephen Kotev. As part of our Back to School series, I'm joined by Jeanne A. Dexter and Paul Schweinler, and we're discussing back to school planning, how to equip your child with the strength and confidence to face the school year from day one. So for everybody but teenagers, it seems you can just put the jar on the table and they're going to want to know what's going on. What happens if I've got a resistant or disinterested teenager? What would you do with somebody that, or even a middle schooler?
Have you met one that isn't disinterested? Is difficult. I mean, that's part of, the unique thing is there's part of their development to be resistant to just about anything new. Sometimes it's a matter of modeling. If you've got a younger child in there, in the family, engaging in the process, and everybody, again, it's safe because everyone's answering the question. After at least round 2, they're finally deciding, well, I have to have a voice in this too. So we've never really heard anybody having difficulty, and I've used it in a counseling setting too, with families, and it's just remarkable. Again, as Jeannie said earlier, I'm not asking the question. Mom's not asking the question. The card is asking the question. The other thing that is so cool is there's cards in there that kids love to hear what the parent's answer is going to be, which again develops their ability to listen.
The other thing you could do if you have too much resistance and you really want to get beyond that, because like I said, it's not about intimidation. It's not about forcing someone to play. You could always, we do have some blank cards in there as well, but you could always say, well, why don't you ask me a question? Create your own question. And a lot of times kids want to do that. They have a question in their mind just from playing, and they want to feel free to ask their own question. And then the neat thing about that is, again, they're asking the question that's their own personal question, and everybody is answering their question. So they like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Paul, I want to go back to what you were saying. What is a question that a teenager really wants an answer to, or really wants to hear what their parents are going to say that you were alluding to?
Again, sometimes my worst frustration is something like that.
I've got one. I've got one of my very favorites. I love this one. Is in the family jar, and it is, if I could change one thing about my family, it would be, and then there's a blank, and then it says because. And every teenager wants to change something about their family.
If I was in charge of the world, I would. Those kinds of things.
I think you also mentioned that there were questions that they wanted answers to from their parents.
Right.
What would be an example of that? Because what you just gave us was, well, how would the teens want to make their family better? But what's something that a sort of resistant teenager would really want to hear from their parents about that they would get from using the jars?
Right. Remember that in each case, the way that it's to be done is everybody asks that same question, so that the teenager may be answering it from their perspective. So is the younger sibling or the mom or the dad. Same question. One thing I would like to change about my family is, everybody's. So the teen jar is written with kind of teenage concerns, both the frustrations that the parents have as well as the teens themselves. But everyone is answering that same question from their different perspective.
And I can add to that. One of the questions in the teen jar also is about curfew. If I could create my own curfew, it would be. Now, when you get around to the parent's going to have a whole story about that, because we all do, because our curfews were a lot different back in the day, and the kids like to hear what their parents' curfew was and why, because then that becomes a conversation of your curfew might have been 9 o'clock p.m., in today's world, the curfew might be midnight. Yeah. I don't know what it is, to be honest with you. My kids are grown. But the fact is that they then have a conversation about how times have changed and why the curfew was 9 p.m. back in the day and why it might be midnight now. And it becomes a whole dialogue about that particular thing.
I think we had one in there like the worst chore that I ever had to do was, and it's amazing, again, different generations, different contexts, the chores are totally different. Well, a lot of the kids don't have many chores anyway today, so what's a chore? Let me tell you about chore. The funny one is I've asked kids, of all the things that you're asked to do, what's the worst? And the most common answer is doing dishes. And I'm saying, wait, time out. Let's talk about the process of doing dishes. When I was a kid, you really got in the sink and washed things rather than just moving things from one spot to the other and pushing a button. So you get that history and that engagement. And understanding.
And the history really builds confidence in the children, knowing where they came from and what happened, and Many times there's a lot of trials and tribulations that our families have come through, but they've come through them successfully. And how did they come through them successfully? They came through them by connecting and staying connected and supporting each other and having conversations about everything. And that really builds a sense of confidence in your children so that when they encounter situations, they feel a little more empowered, if not how to get through it, the fact that they can go back and talk about it and find out how to get through it.
Well, and that was sort of where I was also trying to go with this is you sort of answered half of my question before I've asked it, but I'm looking and saying, well, how does this make this child stronger and more confident? And what I'm hearing is that by understanding what their parents and their previous generations within their family have gone through gives them some sort of confidence of, hey, my grandparents or my parents did this, and I can do this too. But how does this conversation help make the child more resilient so that they can go and not only survive day one, but the rest of the school year?
I think that it's just opening up the subjects of, what are my goals? The kids don't generally think in terms of goal orientation. So it helps the child in this conversation, especially at the back to school, to focus on this is a year that just unfolds, but there's targets. I know that there's expectations with grades. So what am I going to do? What help do I need? And once you go into the school system year then, knowing that we use the term accountability sometimes, we're kind of laying out, this is what I'd like to accomplish, and I've been able to articulate, I'm going to struggle with this, I'm looking forward to this, I have the maybe concern about dealing with this teacher or something, and we create a plan then where we work together. It just opens the door then periodically throughout the week to use some of those jars to check the progress and engage in some other concerns.
I was just going to add to that. When we plan anything, whether it's in business or whether it's medical issues, whenever you have a plan down, you may not always follow that plan exactly, but if you lay down a plan for your child for the school year with them, with their input and your listening skills that you're going to develop along the way, because you do, then they, again, step out there and feel empowered to at least know how to begin. And then you continue the conversation as you go along, and they're more free to do that because you've started off on the right foot by giving them I call it a life map of how to begin the school year. We go out and we talk about this all the time, buy the supplies and we buy the new clothes and we spend all of our money and get our tax-free things, which is still out there. And we don't sit down and equip them how to confront situations that may come up at school. And they can be good situations or not so good situations. If somebody says something to you that you think is bullying, or, you may know from a conversation before you started school, if you talk about it, what you need to do so that you're not taken totally off guard. I think that's what it is. They have to have a sense of security, and unless you cover many of these topics before they go to school, they're caught off guard all the time because you never know what's going to happen in a day's time.
I think it's really also as kids get older, especially teens, this whole process kind of lays the foundation that I actually can talk to my parents safely, and they will listen to me, and I'm learning how to listen about some, maybe difficult things or common things even, so that when stuff comes up, it's almost easier to sit down around the table and then engage in these kinds of conversations.
I'd like to give you an example if we have a minute to do that. I was doing the anger jar at my daughter's request. I was doing the anger jar with my daughter, who's 24, and her boyfriend, who's 31. And his first response was, I don't know if I want to do that. And my daughter looked at him and said, you don't want to do it? You always tell me I have a short fuse. Why wouldn't you want to find out what bothers me? And he said, okay, let's do it. So I drew out a question. And you can't see my face, but I drew this question out, and I was immediately stumped by my own questions. And the question was, or the statement was actually, I'd like you to forgive me for. And, of course, I drew it, so I had to answer first. My heart just sunk. I mean, I literally sat there and thought, whoa, that's a really heavy-duty question, okay, which to a child might be heavy-duty also. And I said, Carly, I'd like you to forgive me for the fact that when you were young, your brother was 3 years older, and he was already involved in everything there was, soccer, baseball, hockey, karate. So we were running, like parents do today, running to every single, event, not stopping. And every time she wanted to do something, we were already busy. So that was something that I carried around for a long time. And when I got done explaining that I felt that I had created a situation where every time she really wanted to do something, she never followed through because we never had the time. And she looked at me and she said, oh, my gosh, Mom, are you kidding me? Have you been carrying that around all these years? And I said, I have. I truly have. I've been carrying that around almost a decade. And she said, oh, I forgive you. And it started this entire conversation that allowed me to let go of something that I had done with my children that, looking back, I would never do again. It's amazing.
I don't even think to talk about it.
And she would have never known that I felt that way had she not drawn that question, or had I not drawn that question out.
So how often do you recommend folks use the jars?
No, we found that kids are really the ones that drive this more than anybody else. Once you start, the kids will say, can we do the jar again? Can we do the jar then? And it's like other things, too. It can sit there for a while, and then it comes back again. There's enough, if everybody's answering questions, there's enough cards in each one of the jar to last actually a month or so, really.
Oh, more than that.
So that's another reason why people really go into it and kind of look for it after the first or second time.
So what happens if, in addition to the talking jars, they're not able to get a hold of them right away, like they're being shipped to them, or they want another way to get their child to talk about their needs and concerns? What recommendations do you have to allow parents to have similar conversations about these important topics that you're able to help them do through using talking jars?
Well, I would first recommend, because it's summer and I know people are shortly coming back from vacation, it'll be over soon, but one of the things you can do is in the car. We all know how kids love to play games in the car. I mean, everybody's got a whole bunch of games in their pocket that they play in the car, and most of them are talking, the license plate game or the state, whatever. So one of the things you might do is allow them to create questions in the car. They could write them down, or they could just come up with them and again, let everybody answer the same question. Or the other thing I would suggest is, when the school year begins, is to find some type of hobby or activity that your child really likes that you can do together that isn't necessarily taking them somewhere and dropping them off, but you can actually sit down and have a conversation together and find out what they're really interested in. Let them pick the hobby or pick where they want to go and talk.
Or just tell a story about your experience in school. I remember when I was in first grade, whatever, starting a conversation, just telling the story might elicit some other questions or, start something that might develop into a whole other chapters of talk.
And one of the things that will tell you immediately what your children do know is asking them, just come right out and ask them when you're sitting with them, do you know where I graduated high school? Do you know where your grandmother came from? Do you know what your family history is? And let them answer it.
Or you be already honest and say, the class that I hated the most in fourth grade was language or something. Who knows?
Right. So what would be the call to action that you would have for our listeners?
At the very, very least, to really make an effort to have at least one day a week where you're sitting around the table together, TV's off, phones are off, and you're just sitting and talking with each other, engaging with each other. More than just the going beyond the chit-chat and asking, how are you feeling? And I have a friend of mine who says that there's three things that we need to say to our kids every day. I love you, I'm proud of you, I'm here for you. And sharing some of that stuff and kind of connecting, I think is really important, at least once a day.
Stephen, one of the other things I'd like to add is that the questions in the jars are good whether you're 4 years old or whether you're 104. And the truth is, the same question can be asked over the years, and your answer changes as you grow. So the same questions I was asking my children at 4 years old and 8 years old and 11 years old are the same questions we're using today, and totally different answers. So it's still a matter of communicating.
So how will our listeners be able to reach you and Paul? What's the best way to reach you two?
The best way to reach us is through the website, which is talkingjars.com, and you can send us an email through there. There's all kinds of information there, any questions you have, right through the website.
Okay. So what are your closing thoughts for our listeners?
You know, the time passes so quickly. Our kids grow up so fast, and life is not static. It's constantly changing. The challenges that I know that I faced as a child in school are totally different than what kids are facing today. It's much, much more challenging. Take the time to sit down and share your stories. Engage your kids in sharing their concerns as well with you.
Don't look back later on and wish you had that conversation. This is like preventative medicine. Have the conversation before you have the problem. That's one of the things that I would recommend, because the problems will come. It's whether you know how to deal with them that will get you through life.
Yeah, I don't know who the famous person was that said, "To know me is to love me," right? And the only way I get to know you is by talking with you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So it sounds like don't hesitate. Always try to engage with the best intentions and help your children know where they're from. Those sounds like some of the big things that you leave us with today. Is that right?
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Paul and Jeannie, thank you very much for being on the show and for joining us today. It's been a true pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you've enjoyed the program. You can find over 300 podcasts archived to listen at your own convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. To learn about upcoming radio programs and resources, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter.